Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
If they got here at 8 o'clock, perhaps he could have been saved.
The Mounties who failed to find a teen overdose victim, now under investigation. Also, a BC dad on trial for his daughter's murders describes an attacker he says killed them. And
when you have a stair and a ramp combined, rarely do they work well together.
Concerns about an architectural crown jewel at Vancouver's Robson Square.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. 2 weeks after a teenager was found dead of an apparent drug overdose near a Walnut Grove skate park, the police watchdog is investigating the two officers who failed to find him. Someone called 911 after seeing a video of Carson Cremeni online. The officers were sent to investigate but didn't see him. As Tanya Fletcher explains tonight, Cremeni was found a few hours later alone and in distress.
He was lying on his back up against the fence, had no shoes, he had no socks. He was struggling for air.
Daryl Cremeni has been placing flowers at the spot where he watched his grandson take his final breaths. It was after dark, around 10 p.m. He found the teen lying here just moments after first responders arrived.
I thought they could save him. You know, I mean, the police were trying to save his life as much as possible when I was here. If they got here at 8 o'clock, perhaps he could have been saved. But it wasn't the police who killed Carson. It wasn't.
14-year-old Carson Cremeni died of an apparent overdose. His family believes some older kids gave him drugs. They say witnesses watched and filmed, then posted it to social media. We now know the first call came from someone who'd seen one of the Snapchat videos and called 911. It was around 8 o'clock when officers first responded here to the skate park. They found nothing, so they left. It was nearly 2 hours later that Carson was discovered about half a kilometer from here. It's those critical moments BC's police watchdog is now investigating.
Where the police were called to, what they did when they got there, how long they were there, what inquiries they made, police radio calls, or 911 calls. We'll put all that together to determine whether or not the actions of the police were reasonable in these circumstances.
This is bullying that led to murder.
Carson's father doesn't blame police for his son's death. Instead, he wants the teens who allegedly gave Carson the drugs held responsible. Charges have not been ruled out.
He was poisoned and filmed while he died, and I blame those boys.
Meanwhile, he says this growing memorial gives him some comfort.
Every time I come, there's more and more flowers.
Most of all, he's hopeful messages like this one, see something, say something, will prevent anyone from dying the way his son did. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Langley.
The woman convicted of killing 14-year-old Rena Verk back in 1997 has been granted parole. The Parole Board of Canada has approved extended day parole and overnight leave to Kelly Ellard. Ellard is currently serving a life sentence. In 1997, Ellard and a group of teenagers swarmed Verk and beat her under a bridge in Saanich. Ellard later returned with an accomplice, dragged Verk to a waterway and held her underwater until she stopped moving. Ellard received day parole in November 2017, but can now stay outside of custody overnight. The parole board says this is to further reintegrate her into the community, a decision Rena Verk's father sees as a positive step.
Just look at that and say, okay, good for her. If she's behaving, it's going to only benefit her and the community at large, the cost and everything, and she can go take care of her child outside and be a responsible person. It's all good then.
Ellard's day parole has been extended for 6 months. The man accused of killing his two daughters on Christmas Day 2 years ago described how happy his girls were hours before they were killed. Andrew Barry was on the witness stand again today at his trial for second-degree murder. Andrea Ross has more tonight from BC Supreme Court.
Andrew Barry testified his daughters were excited about their new pink toboggans on Christmas morning in 2017. It was the second time 6-year-old Chloe and 4-year-old Aubrey had ever seen snow. The girls were supposed to go to their mothers for dinner, but Barry says he decided to break the terms of their custody agreement and let them play longer. Barry went on to tell the court that when he finally returned to his Oak Bay apartment with his girls, he was stabbed in the throat. He also described the person he claims attacked him as having dark skin and dark hair. He says he fell unconscious, and when he woke up, he pulled himself into Chloe's room. Barry burst into tears describing how he found the 6-year-old dead in her bed, surrounded by blood. He also says he remembers waking up in his bathtub, hearing voices saying, "This is the guy who killed his kids." Barry says he was taken to the hospital and wanted to die. He told court there was nothing left. The girls were dead and I was chained to a bed. Barry also testified he tried to kill himself a month earlier. He says he drunkenly wrote a suicide note that was discovered after the girls were killed. One line read in court said, "I felt it better for myself and kids to escape." Barry is expected to remain on the stand tomorrow. Andrea Ross, CBC News, Vancouver.
Surrey is a step closer tonight to getting its own police force. The BC government has given it the go-ahead, but as the CBC's Tina Lovegreen reports, how the transition happens still has to be figured out.
For months, the city of Surrey has been fighting for its own police force.
They want to transition to a municipal police force. That is their jurisdiction.
And now, the green light.
Today is a great and historic day for the residents and businesses of Surrey.
Now comes the when and how.
There's a lot more work to be done, and that's why this committee has been struck. It will consist of members of my ministry, members from the city of Surrey, chaired by Wally Opal, and outside experts.
The committee's role to ensure all the complex details of the transition are worked out, with public safety the top priority. The approval a key milestone for Surrey's mayor, who campaigned on the issue.
I think the public was very clear that they wanted to see their own Surrey Police Force.
City Council voted unanimously in November to move towards an independent force. But when the city released the proposed transition report in June, it was criticized for being vague and incomplete. Councillors became critical about the process, many leaving the party, worried the force would cost more than projected and that there would be fewer boots on the ground than the current RCMP force.
Primarily the reasons so many of us have questioned it is because the report became the mayor's report. It was held tightly in his office. It was a secretive society that developed the report, and there was no appropriate consultation with the public.
McCallum's plan was to have the force start in 2021.
Well, I think that's one of the issues that the Transition Committee will be addressing to make sure that they can speed it up.
And while he was still hopeful today, no timeline was given by the government. Instead, the message was the committee would not be rushed. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Vancouver.
One day after the deadline for homeless campers to leave Oppenheimer Park came and went, the city now says almost 2/3 of them have moved indoors. Staff say 93 people who are living in the park have accepted housing offers from the city in publicly owned or nonprofit-run buildings, including some SROs. Today, workers moved empty or abandoned tents to the edge of the park so they could begin maintenance on the field there. The park board is looking to see if further legal action might be required to enforce the order prohibiting camping at Oppenheimer Park. In the meantime, support services and firefighters and police will maintain their presence at the park. A fatal stabbing in Surrey 2 years ago remains unsolved. And now RCMP and friends of the man who was killed are renewing a call for any information to help with the investigation.
I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that Wally was an angel. The police were well aware of him, and those of us in the local community knew that he made mistakes. But those of us who knew Wally best, he was a really good friend of mine.
Walter Rogers, who went by Wally, died in hospital after being stabbed in the early morning of July 8, 2017. The Integrated Homicide Investigations Team says Rogers was trying to defend his wife after she got into a fight with a stranger outside their house. 2 men have been identified as people of interest and are believed to have information about Rogers' death. You can read more about this story on our website, cbc.ca/BC. The Ministry of the Attorney General says the Gaming Enforcement and Policy Branch immediately launched an investigation into one of its employees after a complaint was made in October of 2018. 7 workers who were arrested by Border Service agents during a raid at Hastings Racecourse on Monday have now been ordered out of the country. It's alleged an employee at the GEPB altered or falsified licenses in order for them to work at the track. The province says the employee does not currently have access to any GBEP offices or government systems, and it has taken steps to secure the integrity of licensing and registration at Hastings Racecourse. Well, now to central BC, where hundreds of forestry workers are rallying in support of jobs in their community. They marched through the town of Mackenzie, which has been hit hard by recent cutbacks in the forestry industry, which led to the closure of Canfor's sawmill and temporary curtailments at the Conifex sawmill. Up to 350 workers are off the job. That is about 10% of the town's population. The workers are asking the province for more support in helping them get back on their feet and for legislation that will safeguard jobs. Well, it appears not all salmon are equally vulnerable to climate change. That's the news tonight from the first ever report on the state of Pacific salmon from Fisheries and Oceans Canada. Almost 5 million sockeye were forecast to return to the Fraser River this year. So far, fewer than 700,000 have made it. The report shows Chinook, sockeye, and coho numbers are declining right across the province. Hotter ocean temperatures are having an impact on the fragile food web necessary for healthy salmon. Climate change, deforestation, and development are also hurting freshwater salmon habitats.
12 of 13 Fraser River Chinook stocks have been recommended for listing under the Species at Risk Act, reflecting the long-term sustained decline in these populations. They remain well below even recent year returns and remain very much threatened.
There is some hope for salmon, however. The report shows fish that spent less time in freshwater are not showing long-term stock declines. Meantime, some members of the Indigenous community called on Jonathan Wilkinson today to declare a state of emergency over that rock slide that's cut migrating salmon off from their spawning grounds near Big Bar.
We have to be able to do something. There's only 100 people on site. We need more. We need the U.S. Army Corps there with some of their engineers. They've only been informally requested, not formally requested. Canada needs to do that, Minister.
The slide was discovered back in June, and crews are still moving rocks to try to create natural passageways to allow the salmon to swim upstream. And there's now evidence that limited numbers of Chinook have been able to get past the blockage. Crews also continue to catch the fish and fly them over the slide by helicopter. Nearly 30,000 salmon have been transported that way so far. Wilkinson responded, saying calling a state of emergency would be counterproductive in saving the salmon because the government would be removed from the decision-making process and the Army would end up taking over. Police on Vancouver Island are asking anyone who may have information about an unprovoked attack on an elderly man in Courtenay last month to come forward. 89-year-old Robert Plum was inside his parked car when he was approached by a man on a bike asking for a cigarette. Plum said he didn't have one, and that's when the suspect attacked him with a machete. Plum has been in and out of hospital ever since. He still can't see out of one eye and will likely have to have more surgery. Police say they've canvassed about 200 businesses, but so far have not found any video that's been helpful in their investigation. 12 homeowners who were forced to evacuate because of major sinkholes in Sechelt are suing the district and the provincial government. They allege the district knew there were geotechnical hazards in the area before approving the Sea-Watch subdivision back in 2006. This past February, a local state of emergency was declared and 14 homes in the neighborhood were put behind fencing. In a statement, the owners say the fact their homes can't be used and are essentially worthless appears to be the result of a series of errors made at multiple levels. Well, it's a beautiful design created by one of Canada's most famous architects, but for people who are disabled, it's a safety hazard. That's why accessibility advocates are calling tonight for changes in Vancouver's Robson Square. Our Jesse Johnston reports.
At the age of 55, Arthur Erickson is an architectural superstar. One of the jewels in the late Vancouver architect Arthur Erickson's portfolio is this ramp that zigzags across the Robson Square steps like a switchback trail on a mountainside. Accessibility consultant Arnold Chang agrees. It's beautiful, but he hates it.
When you have a stair and a ramp combined, rarely do they work well together because you have two competing elements here.
Chang says the problem with the accessibility ramp is it isn't very accessible. It's so steep that going down in a wheelchair or with a stroller can be dangerous. And going up?
I think it's mostly a stamina issue because it took a lot of strength for me to go up. So imagine if someone's older or someone who has fewer muscles, they might not even be able to go up at all.
The ramp isn't Chang's only complaint. It can be hard to tell where one stair ends and the next one begins because they're all the same color, especially if you're visually impaired and it's overcast or raining. Chang suggests making the ramp less steep, adding more handrails, and putting color contrast strips on the stairs to improve visibility. Erickson's admirers say the steps were built to code, and even when they were built 40 years ago, the architect had accessibility in mind because his father lost both legs during the First World War.
So Arthur grew up with a father with a huge disability, which obviously had an impact on his life and his wanting to make public spaces accessible.
When architect Jim Chang was fresh out of university, he worked under Erickson on Robson Square.
I'm still very proud of Erickson's vision.
He's open to minor changes to the design, but he also wants to protect Erickson's vision for the space.
Maybe it's okay to let people know, hey, if you don't feel comfortable going down those ramps, there's an option for you. Take the elevator. We all have choices.
Any changes to the steps would have to be approved by the province. So Chang has this message for the BC government.
Just because something's old doesn't mean it can't be improved. The Great Wall of China is actually accessible right now because somebody had the vision to actually make it accessible. And it didn't really take much away from it. It's still the Great Wall.
Chang knows fighting for changes to one of the city's most recognizable spaces is a steep challenge, but that's never stopped him before, and it won't stop him now. Jesse Johnston, CBC News, Vancouver.
Brett's here. Time for our first check of the forecast. Nice night out there. It was a beautiful day, really.
Yeah, it really turned out to be quite nice. I mean, that drizzle that I had called for a bit earlier to start the day didn't really pan out, but I don't think anyone's going to particularly complain about that. We did have a little bit of cloud this morning, but then the skies really cleared up, and right now, outside of our studios, nothing but blue sky, and that right behind me is, of course, the farmers market that is still taking place every Thursday. Now, I haven't had the chance to get out there yet, but hopefully in the near future. Let's take a look at some of our current temperatures right now. It is very pleasant all in all. We've got temperatures right around 19, 20, maybe even 22 degrees depending on where you are. And unlike yesterday, as I mentioned, blue skies right now, not a lot to be dealing with. Now, if you were wondering how much rain did we actually get yesterday, YVR, Vancouver International Airport, reported a whopping 12.4 millimeters of rain. And I say whopping because that was actually more than we've received the entire month. So we're still below average, but it was definitely much needed. Into the overnight period tonight, we're going to be looking at temperatures once again going around that 14 to 15 degree mark here in downtown. A little cooler. New West, Surrey, Richmond could be going down to about 13. But tomorrow, there is largely going to be sun throughout the afternoon. Temperatures once again getting up close to about 20 degrees, but it is worth mentioning that there is the risk for a spotty shower kind of mid-morning. Now, when I come back into the next segment, I'll give you more details on that. But until then, hopefully you can get outside and enjoy some of this beautiful weather. Mike?
Brett, thanks very much. Talk to you again in a bit.
Sounds good.
And just a reminder, you can watch this newscast and all of CBC's other award-winning content wherever you go by downloading the free CBC Gem app. And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. You can follow us on all platforms for extra content you won't see on TV. Now, many people take it for pain and other ailments. Coming up, why a Canadian woman is now facing a lifetime ban from the U.S. after trying to take it across the Peace Arch border crossing. And thanks for joining us online during this 3-minute television commercial break. It is Thursday, which means it's time for Throwback Thursday. And tonight we're taking you back to the 90s, 1994 to be specific, because 25 years ago this week, Victoria hosted the Commonwealth Games. Taking in all the action was a 33-year-old Ian Hanamansing with a check-in on the event everyone had been waiting for. The Inside Scoop, no holds barred look at the thrilling world of lawn bowling.
There is quite an array of elite athletes here, the strongest, the fastest, and lawn bowlers, a discipline whose intricacies are lost on a lot of sports fans.
Lawn bowling? Probably interesting for those who play it, but doesn't interest me greatly.
It's particularly dull. But to know lawn bowling is apparently to love it. Just ask these women who have come here from Ottawa.
Oh, I think it's wonderful. Really enjoying it. I think that is exciting when you see the best in the world playing, you know.
It is perhaps fitting this most Victorian of sports would be part of this competition. There are no game misconducts here. No one sweats unless it's hot out. But lawn bowlers say don't underestimate the passions that can be ignited.
We're trying to control ourselves a bit there. You got to let the adrenaline out when, he makes a great shot, and, sometimes you just have to scream. It's pretty exciting.
Kevin Jones is 30, his teammate 29. And lawn bowlers say this Canadian team is part of the new face of this sport.
It's changing dramatically. It's become now pretty much a sport that the more elderly person can play, but younger people are very much into the game now.
And as the average age of players drops, it seems some people are reconsidering their opinion of the game.
I would have said maybe stodgy, but not anymore. Not anymore. I'm a real fan.
That comment warms the hearts of lawn bowlers. The sport gets lots of attention in some other countries, and Canadian supporters hope what little exposure these matches attract will win some new fans here as well. Ian Hanamansing, CBC News, Victoria.
Okay, so a little trivia for you the next time you're out with friends, maybe. Lawn bowling is actually one of the Commonwealth Games' core sports, meaning it's got to be played at each event. The 9 other core sports: athletics, swimming, badminton, boxing, hockey, netball, rugby sevens, squash, and weightlifting. So there you go. Now you're up to date on all the core sports at the Commonwealth Games, and we're privileged to see a story from Ian from so many years ago. We're going to be back with more news in just a few moments. A Canadian woman is now facing a lifetime ban from the U.S. after trying to cross the Peace Arch border with CBD oil in her backpack. CBC News has agreed not to identify the woman pending legal action. She says she didn't realize CBD oil was prohibited. When asked by a U.S. border guard if she was carrying any leafy greens, she said no, thinking her favored non-psychoactive pain solution oil didn't qualify. But after a secondary inspection, the CBD oil was found. She was fined, fingerprinted, and turned away with a stack of papers to apply for a special waiver.
Even though she made an honest mistake, if the officers deem that she had a controlled substance with her and she admitted to it, then she's inadmissible for the rest of her life.
A spokesperson for U.S. Customs and Border Protection says it's the responsibility of travelers to know U.S. law. And even if a state has legalized marijuana, federal law trumps all at the border. Well, the United States has no plans to drop its extradition request for Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou in order to seal a trade deal with China. Mike Pompeo made that clear this afternoon on his first visit to Canada as U.S. Secretary of State. And the CBC's Salima Shivji reports Pompeo says Meng's arrest in Vancouver last year is no justification for the continued detention of 2 Canadians in China.
Right off the bat, amidst the smiles and greetings, a strong nod to what Canada wants to hear from the U.S. Secretary of State.
Please do know that our team is focused on helping those 2 Canadians be released. China needs to honor the commitments it's made to the world and it's our expectation they'll do so, and we're working on it diligently. It's wrong that they're being held. Thank you. Thank you.
Canada has been relentlessly lobbying its international allies for months now to press for the release of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, detained in China in retaliation for the extradition proceedings against Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. Today, Mike Pompeo was pressed for details on how exactly the U.S. is helping.
We spoke about it early, and we speak about it a great deal. President Trump mentioned it directly in his meeting with President Xi Jinping. I was there when he did it. He made unambiguous America's concern about this inappropriate behavior.
Pompeo is promising to keep up that pressure until the two men are home. But he didn't mention any potential consequences for China. The diplomatic tensions between Canada and China are intertwined with that country's trade war with the United States. Asked if Meng was a bargaining chip in those talks, Pompeo was unequivocal.
No. It is a legal process by the United States Department of Justice.
Both sides again pledged to get the new NAFTA deal ratified, a priority for the Trump administration, but not so much for the Democrats in Congress. And there was praise for the tight bond between the U.S. and Canada.
We are neighbors, we are friends, and we're an example to the world of what a strong bilateral relationship should be.
An example Ottawa is hoping will hold up as the G7 summit in France looms with an unpredictable president who left last year's meeting here early and left his name off the final communiqué in anger. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Ottawa.
The ongoing protests in Hong Kong are turning family and friends against each other. After this break, we'll hear stories from people on both sides of the divide. Stay with us. Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
If they got here at 8 o'clock, perhaps he could have been saved. But it wasn't the police who killed Carson. It wasn't.
2 RCMP officers who failed to find teen overdose victim Carson Crometti in Langley are now under investigation. They attended the scene but left when they couldn't find the 14-year-old boy. Also, more testimony in BC Supreme Court today from a father on trial for his daughter's murders. Andrew Barry described the man who he says attacked him and knocked him out before the girls were killed.
I'm confident that together we will build a world-leading police department.
The city of Surrey has been given the go-ahead from the province to transition to its own municipal police force. No timeline for when an independent force would actually take over from the RCMP in Surrey. Well, for months now, we've been hearing the words Hong Kong and tension in the same sentence. And for Hong Kongers with links to Canada, the rip runs right through their communities, sometimes even their families. The CBC's Chris Brown is in Hong Kong tonight with their stories.
Just over here, we've got some gloves. You're also going to want something to protect your crotch.
With Hong Kong in the midst of a fight for its heart and soul, this military supply store has become a go-to destination for a Canadian we're calling Robbie.
I'm sorry for the disguise.
Robbie says he's never incited violence, but believes he could be arrested anyway just for being on the side of protesters. Aside from his fears of possibly being arrested, there's another, arguably more important reason for the disguise. Many in his family don't agree with him, especially his Chinese-born wife.
We have had some serious arguments. I'd say that we came very close to actually getting a divorce.
He was born in Canada, met his wife at a Canadian university, and then they moved to Hong Kong more than a decade ago.
Ever since the protests started in June, we've just been in, not just on opposite sides of the fence, but it's like we're worlds apart in what should be done and how to handle it.
So sometimes, without her knowledge, he says he comes to the store to buy survival gear for the protesters so they can stay safe in dangerous situations.
I do try to understand the complex feelings that she must be going through, but on the other hand, I know that if I want to be on the right side of history, I've got to stand with Hong Kong as it struggles to maintain what it has.
There's no way to know how many Canadians living here support the protesters and how many side with the administration and China, but it seems no one remains neutral. Just before Sunday's huge protest, we met up with Canadian Edward Chin.
Just to bring a message to Beijing, actually, that don't use the police as a political means, just to divide Hong Kong people.
He was making signs and preparing to take to the streets.
Danny.
Chin is an author of investment books and he's a recognizable business figure. He used to work for TD Bank. Most business people toe the line so as not to offend China, but not him.
I think, we have to go by what we believe in as someone that uphold our freedoms, core values.
Values that include preserving Hong Kong's special one country, two systems status and pushing back against Beijing's purported encroachments on that. These days, he's also giving financial advice to people here worried about what this uncertainty is doing to their investments. His outspokenness has got China's attention. When the VP of Huawei was arrested in Canada and China detained 2 Canadians in response, Chin spoke out loudly for the men's release.
My office was visited by police and also my home. They sent the fire truck, ambulance people, and police. They came for intimidation. 8 times totally. 8 times in 2 days. Yeah.
But he says the intimidation didn't work. At that big protest, Chin came out and brought his 8-year-old son, Nathan, with him.
And Anita has been to 2 or 3 different marches. He knows that democracy doesn't fall into your lap. You have to walk. You don't have to fight, real fight, but you have to have a peaceful demonstration like this.
But the protests haven't all been peaceful. One of the enduring symbols of the unrest has been tear gas. It's been fired, according to police, when aggressive protesters have targeted police stations or metros in many neighborhoods,
there wasn't anything
including near the Kowloon Street, where artist and teacher Rachel Smith lives.
July 14th, there was a lot of protesting and tear gas, so these are all sirens that are happening.
She created these incredible matchboxes as a type of daily diary, each one telling the story of a different event.
First, it was one of the big protests. 2 million people came out on the street, and everybody has a story, and then this piece goes in here, and then you look at it this way. Everything's tense, everything's uncertain, uncomfortable in many ways, but also not unexpected. This has been coming for a very, very long time.
Smith is originally from southwestern Ontario, but she moved here 15 years ago when she married her Hong Kong-born husband. He didn't want to appear on camera himself again, out of fear of reprisals. She's taken part in the protests, and though many here will see her as an outsider, she says she feels like it is her fight.
I'm not the right person in the right circumstance. I don't have the right face. I don't have the right place. But it's my fight in that it's my family and it's people that I care about, and it's a city that I've absolutely loved living in for the last 14 years.
She says people in Canada often ask her, is it safe? When will you leave?
If I decide to leave, me with my foreign passport, my husband can come with me, maybe my in-laws. But who else can I take? Can I take all my friends? Can I take along my ex-students? We've got to wait and see what happens. We can't just abandon everything that we've set up here. We can't just abandon our family and our friends.
There is in Hong Kong today a big distrust about the existing political system, as all the rallies and demonstrations show. None of the Canadians we talked to could predict how this ideological battle would end, but all of them felt it was now their cause as well. Chris Brown, CBC News, Hong Kong.
You'll recall last weekend, protests over Hong Kong broke out here in Vancouver. On one side, those who support the protesters. On the other, those who are pro-China. Our Leanne Young sat down with one of those pro-China supporters to better understand why they felt the need to protest.
So there have been pro-Hong Kong protests happening since about June, and then they ramped up as we got closer into the last couple of weeks. Seeing that happen, what went through your head?
First, I think it's just peaceful protest. I understand, because in a democracy view, different voices be heard. Of course, a lot of protests become violent, and it ultimately turned into riot, which, well, the other side, they don't think it's a riot. But when you have property damage, when you have one of the business international airports paralyzed for 2 days, and all those public transit systems was basically all paralyzed, I think that's beyond acceptable. That's beyond peaceful march or protest.
So Victor, you've lived in Canada for the last 15 years. Why was it still important to you to come out to protest and to support the China side of it?
I myself, I'm a news junkie, so I've been watching the whole event. I think that there's so many things that's missing out from just basically the other side. They were covering only one small, tiny part of it, and I certainly want everybody to get a whole picture.
So what are the pieces that you think are actually missing?
Anybody that's interested in what's going on in Hong Kong, I encourage them to really do their own research, find out the facts, what started the whole thing, and what has been going on, rather than just watching a very limited channels of media.
Now, some of the pro-Hong Kong protesters, what they're saying is that they're concerned about the encroachment of human rights and the encroachment of their independence. What's your response to that?
The Western point of view, right? We have total different law systems. Sometimes when we are saying China is not a country of rule of law, just because they have a different set of rules. They have different set of laws. They're probably following their own laws, and some of the laws we might deem it unreasonable. Some of the laws that we might not have. The sovereign country, I think they have the right to design their own law system.
But I guess some of the Hong Kong protesters may say that's what they're arguing for, the continuation of this, one country, two systems.
Right now, Hong Kong, they'll have their own judicial system, they have their own political system, they have their political systems more similar to what we have here. They have a legislative assembly. Any law that needs to be passed, they have to go through there, and those members are elected from a lot of different parties.
Right, yes. But that could end by 2047.
We don't know what's going to happen in 2047. Yes, that's already been. I think people should be prepared for it. It might not change. It might. We don't know anything about that.
Okay, all right. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you very much. Good to see you.
A report from the CBC's Leanne Young tonight. Well, at 6:41 on this gorgeous Thursday evening, there's a live look over at Science World, False Creek. Brett's here next with the full forecast and look ahead to the weekend. Stay with us. Lightning strikes have killed 5 people and injured more than 100 more in a popular hiking region between southern Poland and neighboring Slovakia. Witnesses say a thunderstorm boiled up on what had been a clear day. 2 children were among 4 people killed on the Polish side of the Tatra range of the Carpathian Mountains. The injuries include severe burns and head injuries. The most serious were taken to hospital by helicopter. I know you've been following this story, Brett. Of course, it's tragic, but highly unusual.
Very unusual, and definitely tragic is about the best word that can be said for this. These storms really did seemingly come out of nowhere. The day started off quite fine in the southern regions of Poland, and that gave hikers basically the go-ahead to go and enjoy this popular route. However, seemingly out of nowhere, these storms came in at full force, and the lightning was very powerful. What is likely the cause here, atop of one of the mountains in the southern regions, there's a 15-foot steel cross, and it is believed that the lightning hit the cross and the electricity traveled from the cross down through the ground and actually jolted people there and causing some severe burns. Now, the investigation is still ongoing, but the last time something like this happened was in 1937 when the region was struck by lightning and 4 people were killed at that time. Now, in those mountains, of course, lots of rain. On our mountains, we don't really have as much, and certainly not thunderstorms to be worrying about. However, throughout the overnight period and into tomorrow, we're going to be seeing some of that cloud to build in once more. And come Friday morning, I wouldn't be surprised if we just see a passing shower. I don't think this is going to be a lot of rain. As I said, we did get over 12 millimeters yesterday. This would just be a couple of passing showers throughout the morning hours. After that, I'd be expecting some clearing later on into the day, and I think that's going to set the trend fairly well for the upcoming weekend. In terms of what we can be expecting on that note, we do have a system that's coming fairly strong onto the coast of BC, including Haida Gwaii and Prince Rupert, but by the time that we actually are looking at the lower mainland here, we're only really expecting just a passing shower on Saturday. Sunday, at this point in time, is probably going to be largely clear, and then we're truly going to start to get a nice transition into next week. Temperatures all across the region for Friday, Saturday are going to be very close to seasonal, so we'll be looking at temperatures closer to 30 degrees at around the Okanagan, that is, and then closer to about 20 down into the lower mainland. And if we look ahead to where our 5-day forecast would be, just to reiterate again, could be seeing around 21 degrees as our high on Friday, just that risk for a morning shower. Saturday, not too bad, fairly low confidence, but if you're noticing the trend there, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, the sun is going to be coming back in full force. And as I mentioned earlier, there were those typhoons that happened in Asia a few weeks ago, and this is actually the result of it, if you can believe it or not. It's changing the weather patterns across the country, and BC, Alberta, and the Yukon, we get to actually be really warm and dry. So summer is not over yet. By contrast, southern Quebec, southern Ontario, no, not so lucky over there.
Very good.
Yeah.
Stuff happening over there having a big impact on us.
Exactly. There you go.
Thanks, Brett.
You're welcome.
Coming up, record-breaking fires are scorching Brazil's Amazon rainforests. Why some are blaming in part the country's president.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. Join CBC Vancouver's Leanne Young at Feast of Fields on September 8th. This gourmet harvest festival highlights the connections between farmers and chefs, field and table, and more. And join CBC Vancouver at the Love in the Earth Climate Action Fair on August 31st at Riley Park. Learn about the most impactful actions you can take to help our planet. For more on these events, check us out online.
The Amazon rainforest continues to burn at a record pace tonight, a critical shield against climate change. But as smoke streaks across the country, Brazil's president says he doesn't have the resources to stop it. Arthur Pohl has more about why so much of the Amazon is now going up in smoke.
It is the world's most important ecosystem, home to roughly 3 million species of plants and animals. And now the site of 165,000 fires burning at an alarming rate. In Brazil alone, the number of fires has hit a record high, a more than 80% increase compared to last year.
There's monkeys howling.
Canadian Johanna Bell was awestruck when she visited the rainforest several years ago, but seeing the deforestation and destruction prompted her to start a charity to protect the Amazon.
The farmers down there do slash and burn farming, and so they chop down the trees and then they burn the trees. They use the ash as much needed fertilizer. The problem is once they start a fire, they can't control it. They can't stop it.
The new president of Brazil has basically said we're going to turn a blind eye to illegal clearing, illegal fires, to invasion by loggers and miners of indigenous peoples' reserves.
The president today, for the first time, acknowledged farmers may be behind the fires after repeatedly pointing the finger at NGOs. Meanwhile, the UN is sounding the alarm.
We're very concerned about these fires, both, I think, for the immediate damage that they're causing, and also because sustaining forests is crucial in our fight against climate change.
The state of Amazonas declared an emergency weeks ago. Some Brazilians are declaring where they stand on the issue, too. Online, some A-list stars are adding their voice to the cause.
Public outcry over the issue, street protests, people complaining, op-eds and things like that, rather than trying to create more protected areas or something like that, because there's just not the political climate right now to sort of have that conversation.
Back in Toronto, Johanna Bell says Canadians need to step up.
So it's not just about saving trees and animals, it's about saving ourselves.
The fear from scientists in Brazil and beyond is that the damage becomes irreversible. Arthur Pohl, CBC News, Toronto.
And in Washington tonight, where Donald Trump is confounding his critics again on gun control. He has spoken about taking action since back-to-back mass shootings left 32 people dead 3 weeks ago. But as Paul Hunter reports, he keeps waffling on precisely what he's going to do.
Remember Parkland and Newtown, Orlando, Vegas, San Bernardino, Dayton, El Paso, and countless others? Chief among those who can never forget, families of the dead.
My daughter died in Parkland.
Today on various U.S. talk shows, pressing for tougher gun laws yet again.
What more of an emergency situation can we envision for our country?
And slamming Donald Trump for saying he sympathizes while so far taking no action.
You are using the pain of the victims of gun violence to speak in a way that allows you to look like you're going to do something, but only to play games with their emotions and not do it in the end. I don't care about you, Mr. President, but I hate what you do.
Case in point, Trump after the shooting in El Paso.
We have to have meaningful background checks.
Then yesterday, dropping the word meaningful.
I have an appetite for background checks. We're going to be doing background checks.
Moments later, hedging further.
It's a slippery slope.
Slippery slope, a standard line from the NRA used by Trump the day after a phone call with the head of the NRA. Then tonight, another turn, tweeting about a very good meeting on preventing mass shootings, talks with both parties, and a hint at meaningful legislation that'll make a real difference. All of that on the heels of a call to action yesterday from students of Parkland who released their plan for laws to curb gun violence. But the real fear in this country remains. What if nothing ever changes? In the 19 days since those two big mass shootings in Texas and Ohio, there have been 18 other mass shootings here. More will follow. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
During a visit to France, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was adamant the UK is leaving the EU, and equally adamant the country will do so on his terms.
We think that there are ways of protecting the integrity of the single market and allowing the UK to exit from the EU whole and entire and perfect, as it were.
But French President Emmanuel Macron isn't budging. This is the second no Johnson has received to his New Deal offer. Germany rejected it yesterday. The current Brexit agreement includes the so-called backstop, which maintains a border-free Ireland. Johnson is determined to make changes to how that would work, although with just over 2 months to go, the clock is ticking. Well, like any good fair, the PNE is for people of all ages. Coming up, what visitors thought of this year's events on Seniors' Day.
Government officials and First Nations leaders gathered today in the Northwest Territories to announce the creation of Canada's newest national park.
Yes, Nene National Park covers 14,000 square kilometers of boreal forest, tundra, and waterways on the east arm of Great Slave Lake. Gorgeous. The name means land of our ancestors in the Dene Sulene language.
The area is home to caribou, muskoxen, wolves, and many other animals, and it's only accessible by boat or plane.
And you were saying it's nice that we can still create national parks.
I really like that. And honestly, having it be a little bit more inaccessible, I think will help to kind of preserve its natural beauty as it
all
is.
14,000 square kilometers.
That's
right. Well, it was Seniors' Day, I guess still is, at the PNE. Everybody age 65 and better gets in free, and it doesn't close till 11 o'clock tonight, so there's still time to get some thrills in.
Plenty.
I try to come here once a year because I like the ambience and I like to see people and I like to see the rides and people screaming from the excitement of the ride itself. I don't go on it.
Seniors also get free admission to the Ferris wheel. Now, today is just one of the many special offers you can take advantage of for discounted admission. You can find out more on the PNE's website.
I got a good day for it.
I think so.
Got a good night for it.
It'll be great. It reminds me of my own. I would go with my grandmother on the Ferris wheel, actually.
Very nice. Right, Dan Burritt, nowhere near a senior's age. We'll be here at 11 o'clock tonight, right after the National.
Good night.
Great night.